Hi guys, Han here, and if this isn't your first time, then welcome back. If it is, hi, I'm Han. I'm a K-pop fan of almost 20 years, and I've worked here in South Korea as a marketing expert in the K-pop industry. This video is part 2 of our contract validity lawsuit recap of the lawsuit between ADOR and NewJeans. So if you haven't watched part 1, you do actually have to watch part 1 first. This is not just me trying to get views, like you actually will not understand this video if you don't watch the first part. But if you have, then welcome. All the same disclaimers apply to this part as in the first. And if you're not subscribed yet, why? Clearly you watched part 1, you enjoyed it, you came here for part 2, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and the like button. With that being said, let's get into it. The third hearing took place on July 24th, 2025. And as we've done before, it's important to understand the context of what's been happening between the second and third hearing before we get into what was actually said. Now, we left the second hearing with a big question surrounding the Kakao Talk messages, and fortunately, a conclusion was reached on that before this trial happened. Not only did the police approve that the Kakao messages had been acquired legally and therefore were submissible in court for source music in their defamation case against Hee-jin, but the judge of this case also agreed that ADOR could present the Kakao Talk messages for their argument too, and their subpoena was granted. Here's the statement that Hybe themselves gave when this ruling was first announced. So, regarding the case where former CEO Hee-jin and others filed complaints against 5 Hybe executives in July last year for obstruction of business and violations of the Information and Communications Network Act, defamation, the authorities concluded there was no charge. They found that the claims made by Hybe were hard to see as falsehoods since they related to public interest, the purpose of defamation is not recognized, and that the Kakao Talk conversations were obtained through lawful authority during the audit process. Very definitive. Hybe had the right to collect them, Hybe collected them legally, and therefore now they can be used in all the lawsuits pertaining to Hee-jin and by extension, NewJeans. However, you would be forgiven for missing this news because despite this huge victory, the media was only full of news of Hee-jin's one minor victory, which was the fact that the police cleared her on all charges relating to breach of duty towards Hybe. Emphasis on Hybe here. And the media was having a field day putting that everywhere. Hee-jin's name cleared, Hee-jin found not guilty, etc, etc. Although even that decision is still being appealed. But yes, there were some other major wins for Hybe against Hee-jin at this time that kind of went underreported. That being said, because of the media hullabaloo that was happening, NewJeans definitely felt emboldened by this because the optics were in their favor. If the media is found saying that, look, Hee-jin was found innocent, it adds credibility by default to their arguments, and you will see that in their attitude in this hearing. Add to that the drama that was also happening around Bang Seok at the time and his whole stock manipulation case that is still being investigated. You could say that the optics were very much on NewJeans' side. By the way, I'm also wondering, would you guys like me to do a recap of like all the updates in Hee-jin and Hybe's lawsuits so far? There's about 10 different lawsuits and about 4 of them have been resolved so far and that some are still ongoing. If you would like that video, just let me know down in a comment, and of course make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Anyway, both the Kakao and the Hee-jin's victory updates play a huge role in how both sides approach their arguments in this hearing. So let's get into what they had to say. Now with the Kakao Talks approved for sharing, ADOR could finally present the bulk of their main argument. In the previous hearing, NewJeans side were able to speak first and basically laid out their reasons for termination. So in this hearing, ADOR is able to refute those claims and also present their alternate reasoning as to why NewJeans wants to leave. They started their statement by pointing out that Hybe had invested around 21 billion won into NewJeans at the start of their career. They spent 16 billion on the establishment of ADOR, 7 billion on their debut, including 2 billion on their music videos, and they'd even built them their own fan platform and set them up with huge brand deals from the start of their career. So it would be hard to say that after spending 21 billion won on them, that Hybe was trying to sabotage them or treat them unfairly. If anything, they were given extremely preferential treatment from the start of their career and have enjoyed luxuries that other groups both before and after them have not been afforded. Although NewJeans side would love to argue that all of this happened only because Hee-jin would have been the CEO at that time, the courts have already agreed in the injunction that Hybe played a significant role in NewJeans' ability to have had the debut and therefore the following successes that they had. The courts also have already acknowledged that if NewJeans were to leave ADOR, it would do significant damage to the company. So why would ADOR/Hybe themselves be trying to mistreat or replace NewJeans? From there, they went straight into the tampering allegations, and they basically said Min Hee-jin is behind everything. And this is where the Kakao talks come out. They talked about how Min Hee-jin had been planning to terminate NewJeans with her own powers as CEO by forcing Hybe to sell their shares and give her the majority stake through her investors. And not only had she been trying to do this, but she had already been planning this since prior to the audit, and she had already been putting things into work. Not only that, but now NewJeans are using the same weak logic and arguments to justify why they should be terminated so that they can bring that original plan to fruition by having ADOR terminate their contracts. And I want to point out that the timing is important here because they're saying she started doing all of these things before the initial audit happened at ADOR and everything about Project 1945 was discovered, because Min Hee-jin is claiming that that audit was retaliatory for her reporting the plagiarism by Eyelet. So if they can prove that even before that came up, even before she made those reports, even before Hybe reacted, that there was already good reason for them to be investigating her, it really strengthens their case and it completely shoots down NewJeans' point. So they started with a conversation between Min Hee-jin and her shaman, in which the shaman says, within 3 years, you will take them, or we will take them. And that's literally what is happening now. It is just past NewJeans' 3rd birthday and they are at the edge of having their contracts terminated if they win this lawsuit. As unlikely as that is. Now, of course, NewJeans were not happy about these Kakao messages being shown and about the argument being made. So their lawyers were quick with the objections, but the judge instantly shut them down, saying, what are you talking about? We've all already seen these Kakao messages. None of the reporters here, none of the judges here have not seen this already. This is not new information. And you were the ones who said you wanted the official ruling to come out regarding the Kakao talk messages before they were used. That's happened now, so what's the problem? Of course, ADOR also reiterated that the police already cleared this, so why are you still calling this an illegal audit? Why are you still saying that these are private conversations and that these were obtained illegally when that's already been disproven legally? Like, we're all in the courtroom. We're all aware of the law. Like, what are you talking about? After this kerfuffle, ADOR continued to present information about Min Hee-jin's poaching attempt by bringing it back to the original Project 1945. And this time, not only did they add additional context to show how much he had planned, but they also had proof that that plan was already being put into motion. And this is important because it directly refutes the technicality that Min Hee-jin won her first injunction on. Remember, the injunction was won because, one, the judge decided that while this was not in Hybe's best interest, it was not actively working against ADOR. And two, they said that Min Hee-jin could not be found guilty of conspiracy because there is no conspiracy for planning an M&A or a hostile takeover or whatever you want to call this, a management takeover, if you will. Unless they had proof that she'd actually started to put plans into motion, there was nothing for her to be found guilty of. So ADOR is now bringing evidence to the contrary. They brought some Kakao talk messages between Min Hee-jin and VP Lee Sang-woo, and they were talking about asking Dunamu for investment on March 14th. And mind you, Dunamu was one of the two investors who contacted Hybe to let them know what Min Hee-jin was doing. So that's proof that she had already reached out to them. Again, on March 14th, just 2 days later, and there's actually a new Kakao talk we hadn't seen before, she and Lee Sang-woo were talking about investors that they had spoken about and how much money they were planning to get and how much money it would take to remove NewJeans, highlighting the fact that her intention always from the beginning was to cut NewJeans' contracts once she had the power to do so. And I think it's also important to mention that she is planning this with Lee Sang-woo because he was previously Hybe's head of investor relations. So he's going to know very well who's got money, who's looking to invest, who would be willing to come in on the scheme. Well, to a certain degree, clearly he was wrong about Dunamu. He's going to have more information about that kind of financial side than she does. Because mind you, she's never worked in that kind of like C-suite kind of level, and she's definitely not in the financial department. She's the creative. So I guess he was supposed to be like the admin side. Anyway, Min promised Lee Sang-woo a 0.35% stake of the proceedings after ADOR was separated from Hybe, again highlighting that her plan was to set NewJeans free and or separate ADOR from Hybe's main entity and make it her own company. So with investors lined up, real calculations of prices being done and promises being made, it's hard to say that this was just a fanciful chat between friends. These are actual plans, and this is a plan that's actually being actioned. Alongside the business investment moves that were being made, they also pointed out the intentionally false complaints that were being written on behalf of the parents by Lee Sang-woo under Min Hee-jin's instruction. Min Hee-jin actually instructed Lee Sang-woo on what to write in these complaints, and ADOR presented evidence of the document editing history showing Min Hee-jin herself had gone in and made direct edits. But when they submitted this complaint, they submitted it under the guise that it was written by the parents. Now, of course, the parents were also aware of this happening. They basically approved, sanctioned their names being used. I'm sure they would have read the letter first, but still it shows that to a certain level, the parents were in on the plan to have NewJeans removed from the company. Because what this letter was supposed to do is that it was supposed to show that there was already internal turmoil between ADOR and NewJeans, even when Min Hee-jin was the leader of ADOR. And then after this, ADOR, Min Hee-jin's ADOR, mind you, submitted complaints to Hybe, but then blocked any attempt of actual talks between Hybe and ADOR to resolve this issue. So it's showing that Min Hee-jin was directly working against ADOR's best interest by creating problems with the NewJeans parents and by extension members, and by not allowing Hybe to help with the issue resolution. And remember, she won her first injunction on the premise that she was not working against ADOR's best interest. I have no doubt in my mind that when this case with NewJeans is over, ADOR is going to go hard for Min Hee-jin. The last thing they showed from the Kakao Talk messages is that Lee Sang-woo had created 7 key points of complaint that would be used in the media campaign to explain why NewJeans wanted to terminate their contracts with ADOR or vice versa. And those are actually the same 7 points that NewJeans used when they wanted to justify their termination in November, plus now in court. And the only thing they've added to that is the fact that Min Hee-jin should be CEO. So if you think about the 8 complaints, the first 7 are the ones that Lee Sang-woo wrote, and only the last one, we want Min Hee-jin as CEO, is a new addition, because of course, originally in their plan, Min Hee-jin would have still been CEO at the time. So that's just like an added bonus that Hybe gave them, I guess. Now, ADOR said that they did have more Kakao Talk messages to show, but they were going to hold back since NewJeans' side were obviously upset about it. And ultimately, they felt like their point had been illustrated, and they know the judges will review all the evidence submitted anyway. And technically, they already have, because they approved the messages to be shown, right? But the most important thing they mentioned is that since the first hearing, they have made it clear that they are going to bring up this tampering accusation. And until now, while NewJeans' side have continuously said that Min Hee-jin was unfairly removed, or that they didn't provide for when Min Hee-jin needed to be replaced and all this other stuff, they have actually not presented a single argument against the actual tampering allegations themselves. Now, you might say that, well, they don't have to, because this is a trial against NewJeans, not a trial against Min Hee-jin. But if ADOR is saying that we had good reason to remove her, and this is the reasoning, they do by some degree have to argue that that reasoning is wrong if they want to claim that she was unfairly removed. Yet here we are in the 3rd hearing, and you guys have not given a single argument against this tampering allegation. I do also think ADOR is being a bit nice, because as far as I'm concerned, if NewJeans' parents are involved in the tampering, and ADOR has also implied that NewJeans are working according to Min Hee-jin's instructions, they could also accuse NewJeans of tampering too, but they're not doing that because the intention of this lawsuit is to prove that the contract is valid. Again, they're still playing this role of the benevolent, friendly, forgiving company. If they were to start attacking NewJeans, it would hurt their argument and their image, and it would give NewJeans ground to say that, hey, look, they're attacking us now, so if we go back, they're definitely going to mistreat us, which is why they're not bringing that up now. But I know they definitely will. I have no doubt in my mind that they will. Beyond this, they responded to some of the same complaints that NewJeans have continuously been making. So these are the other things that were mentioned before, the 7 other claims. They talked about Ignore Gate and how that had already been disproved. They talked about how the internal document was saying we're gonna remove the association with IVE, not with ILIT, because they've not even debuted at there. I don't think they were solidified to debut at that point, in fact, actually. Again, they said they were within their right to correct the sales numbers. They put in the effort to remove over 200 instances of the training video. The contract with director Shim broke apart because he was the one who said he wanted to end it. They just wanted him to remove the singular video that was directly in violation of their contract and was upsetting the sponsor, i.e. Apple. And finally, that Eyelet is not a copy of NewJeans. They did also respond to one of the other claims that NewJeans side had made, which was that there was not enough effort put into finding a replacement producer. And as we said, they already mentioned that, hey, we've got a producer now, his name is Hitchhiker, here's the person we want to work with, we're just waiting on you guys to sign off on it, but we can't get you to sign off on it if you don't talk to us. So I'm guessing, remember at the end of the last hearing, the court did ask them to bring some proof that they were trying to work with Hitchhiker. So by this point, I'm assuming that they would have presented that, and they could also highlight the fact that we can't make all the decisions by ourselves. We do need NewJeans to actually approve some things, and they haven't done that. Not only that, they actually have another example of NewJeans not keeping their word, because remember, when NewJeans left in November, they said they would fulfill all the existing contracts and schedules, but they actually refused to sign off on the behind the scenes video of Calvin Klein because the company couldn't get in contact with them, and because of that, that content was never released. ADOR actually put up a statement on the socials to say, unfortunately, the upload of this content has been cancelled. So this is even a sign of the fact that NewJeans is not trying to negotiate, NewJeans is not trying to communicate. They're actually still putting in the effort to work with them, and NewJeans are the ones blocking all those efforts. So you then can't come and say that, oh, we didn't inform you guys about this new producer when you're the ones who won't speak to us. ADOR wrapped up their side with two closing statements, one from CEO Kim Ji-young and one from the lawyers. So Kim Ji-young's exact words were, "We filed this injunction for one reason only. We want to continue working with NewJeans. Everyone at ADOR is waiting, so please give us the opportunity to support them with everything we have." The lawyers followed this by saying not only is ADOR preparing for NewJeans to come back, but this is also the path that does the least damage to NewJeans. They also pointed out that this case could greatly harm the entire K-pop system, so NewJeans coming back to ADOR is the best solution for everybody involved. ADOR doesn't lose out, NewJeans doesn't lose out, and no harm is done to the K-pop industry at large. Now, despite everything that ADOR had to say being quite succinct and quite short, I think we can agree that what they presented was pretty powerful, compelling argument and evidence. However, NewJeans side, despite being the ones who requested this 1 hour to present their argument, took a very different approach. They decided that they were going to spend their 1 hour not making legal arguments or presenting evidence. No, we were going to have a slam poetry session. And my oh my, did they come with their literature homework. Because bloody hell, when I tell you the amount of metaphors in the statement. They started their argument with stating once again that this whole audit was retaliatory, it was illegal, and it was Hybe's deliberate attempt to shake things up inside ADOR, especially targeting the period just before NewJeans come back, and also targeting Hee-jin in a form of retaliation for her report about Eyelet's plagiarism. Which is ironic because, firstly, this is happening right after ADOR just presented all their evidence to show that not only was there valid reason to do the audit, if anybody is trying to shake things up inside ADOR at this point of time, it's Hee-jin. She's literally having false complaints being written from the parents of NewJeans at this same period of time, saying she wants them released in April and May, saying she wants a media circus in April and May. So how can you now say that it's Hybe are the ones shaking things up? Anyway, they continued by saying that the audit was completely uncalled for and that the way that it was handled completely disregarded NewJeans' thoughts and feelings. That if Hee-jin was going to be targeted or removed from the CEO position or fired, even though she left voluntarily, the members should have been informed. And because they weren't, that's what makes them feel unprotected. They also once again brought up the fact that they don't think that the Kakao Talk messages should be used as evidence because those are private conversations. And this is where they brought up their first metaphor. They said that if someone says they want to become the president of South Korea, is that the same as being a government threat? Now, saying I want to be the president versus saying, you know what, I'm going to break into the Blue House, this is Korea's White House by the way, break into the Blue House, kill the president, have a coup d'etat and usurp the presidency. Two very different statements. Hee-jin didn't just say, oh man, it would be so nice if we could get out of Hybe. She said, okay, how about we meet with Dunamu, we get some investment, we make some media play, we have the parents write these complaints, and then once Hybe gives us the power, we'll cut NewJeans' contracts, make ADOR worthless, and then bring ADOR out of the company, re-sign NewJeans, and then be free. Are we seeing again the difference between these two statements? Of course, they also once again cited the first injunction of proof that this whole audit was unfair and that Min Hee-jin had no reason to be dismissed, which, mind you, the first audit only stopped her from being dismissed in the first extraordinary board of directors meeting. It didn't actually protect her as a blanket statement, which is why her second injunction failed and they were allowed to remove her from the CEO position. Also remember that she was not dismissed. They did not fire her. She is the one who quit. Honestly, the fact that they keep saying she was dismissed keeps actually driving me crazy, because I'm like, she literally quit. She literally said, I'm not working anymore. She didn't come to work for like 3 months. The court said that she could not be dismissed at that time because she had not directly harmed Hybe. They didn't say that she had not actually been planning the takeover, and we've just proved that not only was she planning, she was actively making moves. We just didn't have the evidence at that time. The case at that time was very much between Hybe and Min Hee-jin, not ADOR and Min Hee-jin. And as I said, if ADOR were to take her for tampering now, I have very little doubt that they would not win. Anyway, not Min Hee-jin's lawyer, well, they are Min Hee-jin's lawyers, but NewJeans' lawyers continued by saying that ADOR is not the same ADOR that the girl signed with because Min Hee-jin is no longer at the helm. And they presented yet another very colourful metaphor by saying, if you have a cell phone and you change the SIM card, yes, the hardware is the same, but can you say that this is my cell phone? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Team Galaxy, it's got a crack scene, but don't watch that. Last time I checked, when we go to, well, I go to SK, you might go to O2, you might go to T-Mobile, wherever you go, when you go to your service provider and you get a phone, you pay for the SIM card and the LTE or the 5G or whatever you're using, and you pay for the device, right? It's TXT. Yeah, last time I checked, that's my phone. That analogy doesn't even make sense because, yes, it is still your phone. Someone's just put their SIM card in your phone. So, yes, it's not your SIM card, but it's your phone. If anything, you should say, like, this is not my SIM card. But technicalities, we already know they're not very good at that. So, whatever the case, the argument doesn't make sense. Also, my SIM card is like, what, maybe $50 a month? The phone is like 2,000. So, are you saying that if someone put their SIM card in your phone, you're just going to give them the phone as well? Like, I digress. In essence, even though this court case is not about Min Hee-jin, NewJeans' lawyers spent a lot of time trying to explain why Min Hee-jin was unfairly terminated, wrongly dismissed, whatever terminology you want to use for it. That's what they're saying. And how this negatively impacted NewJeans' view of ADOR. But as you guys already know, during the injunction between NewJeans and ADOR, the court has already said that Min Hee-jin's dismissal is not a good enough reason to justify NewJeans' contract termination. So why are we even making this argument? We're spending so much time defending Min Hee-jin in a court case that does not concern her to no end because the courts have already decided that that is irrelevant to the actual discussion we're having. Also, once again, and I said this in the first part and I'll say it again, NewJeans never signed with Min Hee-jin. NewJeans didn't join Hybe for Min Hee-jin. NewJeans signed with Source Music and there was no premise that they would ever debut with Min Hee-jin. So that cannot now be a reason for them not to continue within the Hybe ecosphere, especially because they're saying that all the companies in Hybe are Hybe. Mind you, they're equating Belift and Source Music and ADOR all as Hybe. So using their logic, they signed with Hybe, they are in Hybe. The fact that Min Hee-jin is no longer there is irrelevant. Minji signed before Min Hee-jin even joined the company, and I'm pretty sure Danielle and Hani had also signed before Min Hee-jin actually joined the NewJeans project, or the N-Team project at that time. I think the reason that they are riding Min Hee-jin so hard in this statement is because, again, they are talking off the back of her recent victory and the media play that's just happened. They are once again trying to highlight that she was cleared of charges regarding breach of duty to Hybe, not to ADOR, to Hybe, and therefore she's innocent, which means if her leaving is our reasoning and we can prove that she was wrongly terminated, that gives us evidence. But even if she was wrongly terminated, the court has already said it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because ultimately that's an ADOR management issue. You guys are not part of ADOR's management, so you don't get a say. If you want to say that NewJeans are employees, we don't get to pick our bosses. If you want to say that they're business partners, you don't get to direct how your business partner runs their company. So they don't have any power to say that, oh, we don't like the management now, so we don't want to be be here. That's not how it works. And if that is what you feel and that is how you think, then you have to follow the correct procedure, which is paying the termination fee so that you can leave, but you ain't got that money. So here we are. And also, I will say it's very dumb that they keep making these incorrect and legally wrong statements, saying that she was wrongly terminated, saying that she was found innocent, and all this stuff. Because, mind you, they're not convincing us. They're not convincing the public. They're trying to convince a judge. You think the judge doesn't know the law? You think the judge hasn't already read the rulings on the related cases and looked at the evidence and reviewed those cases? Like, you're literally insulting the judge's intelligence by lying to their faces. Like, that's definitely an interesting legal strategy. I've never heard of that one. Maybe there's a Latin name for it, but you let me know. Anyway, moving on, they then went into the other reasons they had to complain, which is basically the same 7 or 8 reasons from the very beginning. So we're just gonna speed through some of those and we'll stop whenever we have a metaphor to talk about. So they next brought up the deleted CCTV from Ignoregate, which I'm not even gonna go into too much about this because I actually have a whole video specifically just about Ignoregate. And we already talked about why there's no second CCTV. We already talked about how Hani's own messages are incriminating. We've already talked about the fact that it's very likely the second encounter never even happened, and etc, etc, etc. So why are we bringing this up? And also, even though we know NewJeans side is equating ADOR, Hive, Source, all the other companies together, the reality is, legally speaking, ADOR is not responsible for anything that any other subsidy or any other label does. Not only that, they've already answered this in November by asking Belift publicly to apologize to Hani. They even said, although the victim can't be expected to remember all the details, the trauma still remains. So we demand an apology to our artist. What more do you want them to do? Do you want them to go and like strong arm the manager and bring her back? Mind you, I'm pretty sure that manager already quit as well. I'm pretty sure I heard that she was like a 20-year-old woman. So imagine being 20 years old and dealing with all this mess when you're just starting your career. Like, managers have a hard job. Like, I've met a fair share of managers. Actually, I even have a manager at my Hag one at the moment. Like, I would say, of all the jobs in entertainment, second to the idol, they do the most work. Like, think about it, they go to all the schedules, they actually have to organize the schedule, they have to drive between schedules, they have to take care of all the idols' needs, manage each of their individual things. Like, there's a reason that K-pop groups these days tend to have more than one manager, because it's a lot of work for a single person. Anyway, I digress, we're getting off topic. They also complained about how during the injunction, when ADOR brought out the CCTV, they had basically humiliated NewJeans by calling them liars publicly. But I'm sitting here thinking, well, if you didn't lie publicly, you wouldn't be exposed publicly. If you guys never brought up the Ignoregate case, they wouldn't have had to defend the Ignoregate case. So, piggybacking off of this, again on their logic that all the Hive labels are one entity, they're saying that even though ADOR didn't directly attack the girls, which wasn't your whole argument that they were mistreated and not protected for the last 3 months, but okay. But even though ADOR did not directly attack the girls, Source Music and Belift did attack them, and ADOR has not put enough effort to protect them. And isn't it cruel to then send NewJeans back to the same company, back to the same building, where inside the building are all the people who've been attacking them? Now, also mentioned, they didn't actually say what attacks these were. I'm assuming they're talking about, obviously, Islet saying the Ignoregate thing, like, even though that didn't happen. And I'm assuming because they mentioned Source Music too. I guess they're saying that by their debut being delayed, that was the attack, because I can't think of anything that Source Music has done to NewJeans, or that they could try to say Source Music has done to NewJeans since then. Or maybe it's the ambassadors thing. Maybe, like, what attack? They didn't specify, so I don't know. If anybody can, like, put that logic together, leave us a comment, inform the class, please, because I have no idea what they're talking about. And mind you, this has to be after Hee-jin is not the CEO anymore, because they're saying that it's the current ADOR that's responsible. So it has to be something that happened when the current ADOR was in charge, even though Ignoregate also happened when Hee-jin was CEO. But I digress. They brought out another metaphor here, saying that essentially this was a family fight, and this, by telling NewJeans to go back to ADOR and endure the attacks from Belift and Source Music, Hive is basically acting like a parent, sending the younger sibling to be abused by their older siblings. Interesting. If anybody's the younger sibling here, it's Islet, but I digress. They continued by saying that when Hee-jin was around, she would stand up to Hive and she would protect NewJeans. But now that she's not there, they feel like NewJeans has no protection because the current ADOR is not doing enough. And to that I would say, well, Ignoregate again happened when Min Hee-jin was CEO. If they're talking about the fact that the Seraphim debuted before them, that also happened when Min Hee-jin was CEO. It literally happened because she was setting up ADOR. And also, I want you to bear in mind that in the first hearing, they said that they did not leave just because of Min Hee-jin. But from that hearing until now, they have continued to send to her more and more and more in their arguments. And in everything we've talked about thus far, with the exception of maybe the Ignoregate situation, they have still continued to mention her unprovoked. Whatever the case, they believe that Min Hee-jin has to be the CEO because that's the only way for them to feel safe in Hybe. They also said that the reason that Hybe is continuing to abuse NewJeans stems from Bang Seok's jealousy of Min Hee-jin's success because he's only failed at girl groups, and the fact that he doesn't like her brazen attitude, the fact that she's willing to stand up for him. Which, firstly, if you want to say that Bang Seok failed to make a successful girl group, I don't actually think that statement is true anymore, because technically Le Seraphim is a joint product between Bang Seok and Source Music. And although Le Seraphim have had their scandals from their debut and also like the Coachella thing and things like that, and obviously this whole situation, I would find it hard by any measure to say that Le Seraphim is not a successful girl group. They're popular in Korea, they're popular overseas, they sell well, they actually generally do perform well. I've seen them live at an award show. Coachella was just an off day, and honestly I don't blame them because so much was happening at that time. I could imagine not being in your best condition. It was a shame that it happened the way it happened when it happened, but I can tell you from my experience that Le Seraphim are fine live. So to say that he hasn't got a successful girl group when Le Seraphim were doing pretty well back then as well, I would actually say they were doing slightly better in the early days. I don't know how you could say that. And also they're doing very well now. Like, all the girls are girling. Bop! Anyway, I know they've had other comebacks since then, but I love that song. Also, they're kind of contradicting themselves with this because they're saying that Bang Seok is upset that Min Hee-jin had a successful girl group. But by their own logic, ADOR is Hybe and Bang Seok is Hybe, right? So, like, most people think Bang Seok is Hybe. So if they're successful, that's ADOR's success, which is Hybe's success, which is his success. Yes, he didn't directly contribute to their debut, although he did technically contribute to their training because, again, they were supposed to be the product group before the Seraphim. It doesn't make sense to say that Bang Seok is jealous of the thing that is putting money in his pocket. The logic. You know, we actually have to forget logic to get through this because there's not very much of it. What there are a lot of metaphors. So we have yet another one. This is a very interesting one because we're taking it back to the Joseon Dynasty days. Bang Seok is a king. And Min Hee-jin is a general, yes, boss babe. And because Min Hee-jin has gone out to war and won, the king is now jealous of her success for doing the thing that he sent her to do and is accusing her of treason and now executing her, i.e. doing the audit and kicking her out of the company, even though she left voluntarily. Now, using their own analogy, there's a few problems with this, yet again, just like the cell phone one. Firstly, is it not within the king's rights to dismiss their stuff? That's how a monarchy works. This is not a democracy, right? It's a monarchy. So, by your logic, he has every right to kick her out. But you've been complaining that she was kicked out unfairly. So which is it? Is it his power or is it unfair? Now, they did mention that it's within the king's power to fire the general in this analogy, mind you. But then they said, what happens to the people? The people being NewJeans, mind you. Now that they're defenseless against invaders, the general's job is, of course, to go to war and fight with enemies and, of course, protect the city and stop invaders. But if the king removes the general, they're just going to get a new general. Like, that's how it works. It's not like the general dies and the whole system falls apart. Also, kings fought in wars when their generals were injured or whatever the case might be. So there is still a protector. If you're saying he's a king, the king would replace the general, or the king would actually go out and fight to protect their people, which is exactly what ADOR did. They found a replacement for Min Hee-jin, i.e. Kim Joo-young, and they've still gone out of their way to set up plans, make these like concerts and albums and blah, 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 blah. So again, this analogy doesn't really make sense. They're trying to use this as a way to say, like, this is why the members don't feel protected, and this is why we feel there's been a breakdown of trust. But even the analogies they're using, even these metaphors that they're painting these wonderful masterpieces with, don't make any sense. And you know what? I'm going to stop here for a second and just point out that they've been talking for a lot already. I'm sure this has already been like 30, 40 minutes. I've been talking for a lot too. And I'm giving you the condensed version of what they said. And have you noticed how we haven't mentioned any evidence? Now, I want to bring up that statement they made when they lost the initial injunction, saying how they're looking forward to be able to use all the civil processes to gather the evidence they need to make their argument. And here they are making their argument, and they have presented nothing. Not a single picture, not a single message, not a single document. Their whole argument is being painted with creative thoughts and shaman prayers. And not only that, even with all they've said thus far, and even with ADOR calling them out for this, they have still not directly addressed any of the tampering accusations. They have still not justified why Min Hee-jin was making these plans, or why Min Hee-jin was forging these letters, or why Min Hee-jin was meeting investors. They have not touched any of that, and it's because they know they have nothing to say. Anyway, let me not rant too much because there's still a lot for us to get through. They spoke for an hour, which means I'm probably going to speak for an hour too. So they then moved on with their argument and moved into a more emotional place. And now they've done a bit of the literature and a bit of the accusations. They're now looking for some sympathy, and this is where they brought out the petition written by the members. They explained that since Min Hee-jin was removed or left or whatever you want to say, the members have had a full-blown identity crisis. They're stuck between wanting to perform but not wanting to work with this ADOR, and accusing ADOR of being cold and calculated by saying a contract is a contract, you have to work. They said that the members have been getting depression treatment, and that they feel anxious and have panic attacks anytime they go near the building. And I know I just said I wasn't gonna run, but I'm gonna run again, because I will say I do believe this. I do believe that the members are probably dealing with depression and a lot of anxiety. I know I would. I know I most definitely would. And I'm sure certain things trigger that, seeing their old stages or seeing news about this, or as I said, going near the high building. I'm sure that would bring up those feelings. And I'm not going to get too much into the fact that I don't like people using their mental health as a excuse or a way to avoid responsibility, because that's a whole long conversation. But I will say that while their feelings may be real, that does not necessarily mean that their argument is valid. And here's why. For example, if I say I'm scared of butterflies, I have a genuine, overwhelming phobia of butterflies. Does that make butterflies bad? If I jump off a bridge to get away from a butterfly, is the butterfly responsible? Or is it my responsibility to identify that I have an irrational fear of butterflies, and therefore I need to seek treatment for my fear of butterflies? The fear that NewJeans feel is real, but the reasoning behind that fear is not logical. And it's their responsibility to first identify that. It's also their responsibility to treat that fear. And the way they can do that is they have to talk to ADOR. They have to see firstly, they have to understand what the risk is beyond this termination penalty, which they are trying to not pay, and they think they can get away with not paying. They also need to understand what the true risk of them going back is, if any, which I don't really think there is. And they need to reach a settlement that way, rather than now crying that, oh, I'm depressed, I'm anxious because they dragged me to court, when you asked them to. You guys wanted them. The original plan and what they were hoping for was that ADOR would drag them to court to terminate the contracts. And because ADOR was the one terminating, they would be the ones holding the bag. But now it hasn't worked that way, and their plan is not going to plan, and they lost the injunction that they, for some reason, thought they were going to win, with no evidence and no logic. And now they're here and they're saying, wow, we can't see a positive end to this. We're so scared, we're so anxious. But they don't realize that the one thing they're not considering is the solution to their problems. You have to face that fear. You have to actually talk to ADOR, come to a settlement, go back to the company and actually see what happens. And mind you, with this whole legal process, they now have a standard that they would have to keep ADOR to. If they were to reach a settlement, and we will talk about my predictions for the mediation session in a moment, but if they were to reach a legal agreement and then ADOR did anything that did not meet that agreement, they would have significantly stronger grounds to then terminate the contract. But they're not even giving that option a chance. Anyway, Rant aside, I will also point out the legal problem with this argument in that that's how they feel now. That's not how they felt in November at the time they terminated the contract. And the judge has already said you cannot bring new reasoning to why you want to terminate the contract retroactively. You have to argue your case based on the reasoning that you gave at that time. So unless you got some doctor's notes from back then saying they were taking antidepressants, too fucking bad. Anyway, in the petition, NewJeans said that by forcing them to go back to ADOR, it's essentially the same as, once again, metaphor, sending a school bullying victim back to their bully. And of course they're going to use this specific verbiage, if you will, because school bullying is a really big thing in Korea. I'm sure you guys know if you consume any level of entertainment news, especially over the last like 2-3 years, there've been a lot of school bullying like cases and people getting cancelled for that. I will say school bullying is quite severe here, like it is violent in nature. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that it's taken seriously, but they're choosing that verbiage to get a specific reaction, especially to give some good buzz lines for the media reports they know will come out of this case as well. They continued by saying that all the staff they'd known had left because they'd been abused or harassed by Hee-jin and ADOR, and they asked, how much louder do we need to scream for people to hear us? Oh, Shakespeare. Clicks. I can't click with my left hand. Anyway. They said that the party has been a nightmare of their own creation, and that they are struggling with depression and constant nightmares, which again, I don't doubt that's true. I most definitely would be. And they're saying that they are traumatized by this whole situation. And I would like to ask them, how do you think Islet feel? Because you guys have actually made active choices that got you to where you are. You're the ones who dragged them into it for no reason, on a lie. And you've yet to apologize. You've yet to actually own up the fact that they didn't deserve that. You've yet to own up to the fact that your fans completely harassed them. Girls younger than you, actual minors, like all of them are minors, from their debut because of things that you said. But I'll care about our feelings. Anyway, the point of this petition was to show that, once again, this is not Min Hee-jin's instructions. This is NewJeans' own will. They cannot trust the company. They do not feel comfortable at the company. And at this point, they also once again shot down the idea of there being any sort of settlement. They use another metaphor, this one about marriage, because let's add some love and hate into this. All's fair in love and war, right? And they said this is like saying, if a wife told you that she cannot stand the sight of her husband, is it reasonable to say, well, you signed the marriage contract or the marriage certificate, that's your husband now, that you cannot leave him? And I feel that this is actually a really stupid analogy, because firstly, what even? But also, this is something I didn't know until recently actually. Marriage law in Korea is insane. Actually, it is incredibly hard to get a divorce if only one person wants the divorce. And you actually have to have like specific conditions. For example, if one person wants the divorce, and let's say it's a wife who wants to divorce her husband, that husband needs to have been living outside of the house for at least a year, or there needs to be like evidence of like financial abuse or something like this. Like there are such strict conditions under which you can get a divorce in Korea. So this is literally one of the worst examples you could use, because the law would actually tell her to stay with her husband in that situation. So too fucking bad. So what are you talking about? They also used another analogy as well, this time bringing Min Hee-jin back into the mix and saying that Hybe is like an abusive father. And Min Hee-jin is like a mother who homeschooled her kids, but after they separate, you're now telling the kids to go back to the father's house and focus on the studies and not worry about the abuse and not worry about the fact that their mother has been chased out of the house. And I'm like, okay, if Hybe, or Bang Seok by extension, is an abusive father, what is the abuse? Care to elaborate? And also, since we're using Kakao Talk messages now, how are you going to justify all the abusive things that Min Hee-jin herself said about the members? Calling them fat, calling them stupid, calling them ugly, saying they're talentless, saying they're worthless, saying she would kill them if they ever disrespected her. No, that's the loving mother. So I really want to know what this massive abuse that Bang or Hybe has done could possibly be that makes Min Hee-jin pale in comparison. They continue by saying that accusing NewJeans of just following Min Hee-jin is an insult to their intelligence, but that the girls simply want to go back to the ADOR that they signed with. And I'm like, am I crazy? Because that singular sentence is so contradictory. You've literally just said, we do not need to be with Min Hee-jin. We are not trying to follow Min Hee-jin. But Your literal argument this entire time is we need to be with Min Hee-jin. Min Hee-jin is the one protecting us. You just gave us the analogy of she's the stay-at-home mum and now she's getting kicked out of the house and the kids want to follow her. So what do you mean they don't want to follow her? That they don't want to be together? When your whole argument is that we want to be together. Not only that, in that same statement, they also said we would consider going back to Hybe, going back to ADOR, if Min Hee-jin was reinstated as CEO with all her previous control. And I'm like, if this is not a prime example of how unhealthy NewJeans' dependence on Min Hee-jin is, I don't know what it is. Because you've literally just said that you're taking antidepressants, you're having panic attacks from just seeing the building, but now you're saying, oh, but if Min Hee-jin is there, we'll be fine. Yeah, we'll be fine. So you're telling me that Min Hee-jin is all you need to overcome your depression and anxiety, that Min Hee-jin is better than modern medicine, and somebody somewhere will still try to argue that that is not an unhealthy codependence between idols and their label management. Again, find me any other example in K-pop where this is a thing. That is a huge red flag. Anyway, let me calm down a little bit. The lawyer says in his very emotional plea that while I am a lawyer who understands the law and understands that contracts matter, we have to remember that K-pop idol contracts are special. They involve humans as opposed to any other kind of contract with an agency. Even with a regular business contract, are the people who work in those companies not humans? Are the employees of ADOR not humans? They then went on to accuse ADOR of being too focused on the contract and saying that yes, while management was at their discretion, which is the first reasonable thing you said today, they also think that Min Hee-jin is a master artisan. Now, I have said in previous videos that I respect Min Hee-jin's work to a degree. And I can recognize that she does make a valuable contribution, which is what ADOR also said. But a master artisan is a step too far for me. A master artisan is a crazy statement to talk about K-pop, mind you. And they're saying that, okay, there's been this constant thing of you guys should have had Min Hee-jin as a clause in your contract if you were expecting to work with Min Hee-jin for the rest of your contract. But they're saying, NewJeans always are saying that with Min Hee-jin being a master artisan, was it not a given? If we're signing to her company, if we're debuting through her company, it was so obvious that we wanted to work with her that we didn't need to write that in the contract. And to that I would say then, let's forget about contract law. Let's do it all on intuition. But anyway, again, that doesn't make sense because I will beat this dead horse until there is literally nothing left but bone dust. You didn't sign with Min Hee-jin. You joined Hybe through Source Music. You signed with Source Music. You were supposed to debut through Source Music. So the fact that you, in that process, somehow at some point ended up with Min Hee-jin was not of your own volition and it was not your choice. If anything, it was Min Hee-jin's choice to try and take you guys and make ADOR. I'll give her that. But she did not make NewJeans. Source Music did that. So yeah, sorry, this argument actually just pisses me off. Like, you know what it is I hate being treated like I'm stupid. And I know this is not, obviously, it's not personal to me, but this is how they're talking to the judge. This is how they're talking to the lawyers on ADOR's side. And this is what they're telling themselves to believe that they have any chance of winning this case. Fortunately, however, that is the end of NewJeans' statement. Bloody hell, I'm so happy we're done. They did have, I think I mentioned this before, each side had an hour and then they had like a 1-minute rebuttal. So we are going to go very quickly through the rebuttals and then we're going to talk about the mediation and what I think happened and what's going to happen in the future. So this is also a good time for me to say, if you haven't liked the video, why not? No, I'm joking. But I would appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed if you haven't already, especially if this is not your first time watching me, because clearly you like me enough to keep coming back. A lot of you guys are not subscribed, something like 70 or 80% of you guys, and I think that's offensive, quite frankly. No, it's not that deep, but I would appreciate it. Anyway, let's get back into this because there's still a lot to go through. Moving on to ADOR's final rebuttal, like their 1 minute, I'm just going to go quickly through the bullet points. They first pointed out once again that the audit could not be retaliatory because they've already presented the evidence of Min Hee-jin's messages prior to the audit, which justified the audit happening, and NewJeans lawyers have still not responded to this point. We're pointing this out once again. Also, while the police agreed not to investigate Min Hee-jin further for breach of duty towards Hybe, they did also acknowledge that the audit was legal. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. They actually said that. They're like, yeah, Hybe was within their right to do this audit. So you can't keep calling this an illegal retaliatory audit when the court has said this and the police have said this. They also pointed out something that I've been saying, is that there is a total disregard to the remaining staff who contributed to NewJeans' career thus far. Yes, Min Hee-jin made a significant contribution. Yes, a lot of the people that were close to Min Hee-jin and are close to NewJeans have left the company, but there are still a lot of people who are waiting and determined, and their futures, their paychecks, their livelihoods are determined by NewJeans coming back to the company, because at the moment, as far as we know, officially, there is no replacement artist. ADOR's only asset, as of yet, is NewJeans. They also point out my favourite argument, which is that the defendants in this case are NewJeans, not Min Hee-jin, so why do you keep talking about her? Like, you guys literally use, of your hour, about 59 minutes were talking about Min Hee-jin, and then 1 minute was talking about NewJeans are depressed. You guys are literally centering the majority of your argument on Min Hee-jin, but then saying that you're not leaving because Min Hee-jin left, but you're leaving because you think it's unfair that Min Hee-jin was forced out, but that's not the reason that you're leaving. Like, ADOR also pointed out that the NewJeans members keep saying that they're scared of bullying and oppression and being mistreated, but they've yet to actually provide any examples with evidence, and the only example that they did provide, i.e. Ignoregate, has been disproven, and honestly it's still not big enough to justify a termination anyway. NewJeans is ADOR's only artist, so their success is ADOR's success and by extension Hybe's success, so why would ADOR try to replace them or hurt them? And their final point was also a slightly new argument that even with access now to Min Hee-jin's entire Kakao Talk history, and mind you, any evidence that ADOR submits, NewJeans' side can see and they can use as well. There is not a single message of her expressing the fact that she was upset about plagiarism. There is nothing with her saying, oh, I can't believe Hybe has done this. I can't believe they've made Eyelet to replace NewJeans. Not one. However, there are plenty of her talking about how she could use a plagiarism narrative as a way to pressure Hybe. Her saying, oh, you know, we could try and sue Hybe for, or not sue, we could try and report Hybe for plagiarizing NewJeans with Eyelet. And her VP even said, I don't think that's a strong case. And she even responds, I know, but we just need the headlines. To this, NewJeans gave a very short response. They once again pointed out that Min Hee-jin's messages were a private conversation, which the court has disagreed with, the police have disagreed with, this judge has disagreed with, but again, and they gave one more metaphor, because we're not done yet. One more metaphor. They said, if an employee said they wanted to become the CEO of Samsung, does that mean they're planning corporate espionage? And I've already explained why that's stupid, so I'm not even going to get into that, but I just wanted to point out that they made that comparison again. They also mentioned that we don't want to talk about Min Hee-jin. We don't want to talk about Min Hee-jin, but it's impossible for us to talk about the context of this case without talking about what happened to her. Okay, if you say so. If ADOR could return to the ADOR that it was in April 2024, i.e. before the audit, it happened at the end of April, the members would be open, maybe open, not even specified that they would be, maybe open to coming back, but this is not a promise. And at that point, what would their excuse be? Because their literal whole argument is that we want Min Hee-jin back. And now you're saying, even if you do bring Min Hee-jin back, we might not go back. Like, then what do you want? What do you want? This is once again proving ADOR's point that your reasons for terminating keep changing, because you're now saying that even if we give you the thing you've been asking for this whole time, you may come back. Their final statement, fortunately, was that they asked the court to give them more hearings, and this is basically just a way to drag things out, because mind you, they presented zero evidence in this hearing, so what do we need more hearings for? You haven't got anything new to share. But we already talked about at the end of the first part why they're trying to drag out this case, so I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, fortunately, finally, that is the extent of all the arguments that were presented in the third hearing. So the court concluded by saying that they would set a mediation session for August 14th, which, as I said, would be after I recorded this video, but we will talk about that in a future video or live or something like that. And that the final ruling would be delivered latest by October 30th. I think the court is pushing for them to have this mediation session so that it can reach a settlement, because the court knows that NewJeans does not have an argument, and that, again, this, like, losing this case is only detrimental to NewJeans. Them winning this case has significant losses to everybody, including themselves. They just don't see it. So I think the court is really trying to do what is in NewJeans' best interest, while also being impartial and saying, like, guys, if you want to convince us, you need to bring a stronger argument, because if you can actually prove that you're right, we can side with you. We can give you what you want. You can have the free termination, and it's not going to have this massive bad impact because there will be an actual reason for it. But the argument you're giving right now has no reasoning. Therefore, we cannot allow this because it will undo the fabrics of the K-pop industry. This is bigger than just ADOR and NewJeans. Okay, so now we're going to get into my predictions. And I will say very openly, the first mediation will 100% fail. No doubt in my mind. In fact, 110%. I would put money on that mediation failing. And the reason why is, firstly, as I've said, because of Hee-jin's recent win, and I don't even think it's worth calling it that, but that's the way they see it, they are emboldened. They are feeling brazen, they are feeling confident, they believe that the tide is finally flowing in their direction, fate is on their side, if you will, and that is making them feel that they can push a little harder and that they can have their requests met. They came into this final hearing with no evidence, with their Korean literature homework. They knew they had no argument to present. Meanwhile, ADOR came with the Kakao messages, they came with contracts, they came with clear proof of Hee-jin's planned coup, and they came with all the things that the judge had previously requested them to bring. And somehow, some way, these girls still think that they have the upper hand. When it goes to mediation, they are going to have one request and one request only, and it's been their same request since day one, since the first time they spoke up. They want Hee-jin back as CEO. And that will happen over ADOR's dead body, over Bang Ji-hyuk's dead body, and over every HYBE label fan's dead body, mine included, okay? Not only that, they haven't even given a real reason why Hee-jin needs to be the CEO and not just the producer. And as we've said multiple times, they don't have the right to make that request in the first place. So the judge is, even before ADOR even gets to respond, the judge is probably just going to shoot them down and be like, we've told you, you can't ask for that. So unless you've got another proposal, your request is being denied. Like, I'm denying it. Screw what ADOR thinks. It's not happening. The court has already told you it cannot happen. And ADOR, like, all the time, all the energy, all the money that HYBE has already invested into kicking Hee-jin out, into using their court options, into suing her for defamation, would go to waste if they just brought her back. It literally directly contradicts everything they've done and they are still doing. Okay. That's the first thing. On ADOR's side, I think what they're going to offer is very clear. They're going to say, if you come back, we let bygones be bygones. We've already got, they're going to bring what they've already brought, the proof of their plans for the future. They're saying, okay, you want a world tour? You tell us what countries you want to go. You want to work with specific artists? You let us know, we'll reach out to them. They're going to say, we're going to do everything we can within our power to give you the career that you want, because that is what we as an agency are supposed to offer you. And we're going to let all of this stuff go into the wind. We're not going to sue you for anything. We're going to let go of the complex con thing. Hell, we might even produce Pit Stop properly. Like, they're just going to come with, like, essentially the most amicable and forgiving arrangement. They might even, as like a compromise, because there has to be a compromise somewhere for it to be a settlement, right? So even as a compromise, they might say, hey, we'll reach out to Hee-jin and offer her the producer contract again. Now, I know Hee-jin will not take that. You know Hee-jin will not take that because it doesn't involve money. And they know Hee-jin will not take that. But it will be a gesture of goodwill to show, like, look, we're still trying to meet you halfway. And mind you, it's not up to ADOR whether she accepts. They only have to give her the offer if they decide to do so. And they're going to be doing it on the premise that they know she's not going to accept it. So either way, it's not a loss to them to offer that. But it looks good in front of the judge. It shows that they are trying to do what they can in line with what NewJeans is requesting, right? If they do that, NewJeans doesn't actually have a reason to say no. As I said, they haven't actually given a reason why Hee-jin must be the CEO and not just a producer. But they will, regardless. They're still going to say no. They're going to say that's not good enough. It's not what we wanted. Therefore, let's go to the final trial. And at the final trial, they're going to lose. Obviously, when they lose, they're going to appeal. They're going to say, no, this isn't fair. We have more evidence. We asked for more hearings, blah, 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 blah. And of course, those appeals are probably going to last longer as well. Mind you, we expected this case to be 2 to 3 years when all of this started, but that was on the premise that it was a termination case, and that would be because they had to decide whose fault the termination was. But because this is a contract validity case, it's actually ending up much shorter. So if you think about it, between April when this started and October when the first ruling is supposed to come out, it's only 7 months. Even with like 1 or 2 rounds of appeals, I can't see this case being more than like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, depending on the court schedules. So if we keep that in mind, the result is going to be soon. Basically, it's going to be pretty soon. Hell, it might be overlapping with BTS's comeback. And when the results come out, at that point, it's going to be round 2, because ultimately, even after the appeals, they're going to lose. And at that point, their only choice is to ask for termination. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly what that process is. I imagine it would start with a talk with the company saying, okay, we've lost, the contract is valid for whatever terms or whatever reasons that the court gave. We still don't want to work with you, so we want to pay the termination fee. How the termination fee is calculated will probably be the base of a new lawsuit. And I say that it's going to be a lawsuit because, of course, NewJeans are going to push for the lowest number possible. And I don't think Hybe or ADOR would actually push for the highest, but they're definitely not going to undercut themselves. They're going to decide what they want and how they want NewJeans to pay it also. And NewJeans are, of course, going to have a problem, because they're always going to have a problem. They're going to say, look, we're even offering to pay the fee and they're making it difficult for us. They just don't want to let us go. Like, I can see the headlines already. But regardless, I can see that being another court case that takes possibly another 2 years, another year and a half to 2 years. And I feel like at the end of that, it's whatever they settle on. I don't even know if they'll tell us publicly. I actually think if they did do that second court case for termination, we wouldn't know what the number is, but it's going to be a high number for sure, and it's going to be something they're going to be paying off for a significantly long period of time. They will not be able to use the name NewJeans. They will not be able to use their old IP. And actually, so right now in Korea, there's a new law that came into effect last year, which is that once a idol has left a company, after 3 years, they have the right to their old IP. But I imagine ADOR would add in a clause that would only take effect 3 years after they finish paying their debt. So until they've paid the debt, that 3 years timer doesn't even begin, which means they would have to literally start from scratch. Would they continue with NJZ? I feel that would be ill-advised because trademark infringement, we already discussed that too. They would probably try to rebrand. Now, here the big issue is, would Min Hee-jin support them? I would put money on not a chance in hell. Min Hee-jin already doesn't have money. She's literally being sued for the tissue she wipes her ass with. And even if by some miracle, some chance, she did actually win all her lawsuits and she did get the money, after she's paid back what she owes Bang Shiok, after she's paid all her legal fees, and she also has to pay like employer B and her legal fees as well, I doubt she's going to have much left. And we've already seen from Min Hee-jin's history that she is not someone who wants to invest her own money. That's the reason she came to Hybe in the first place. She said, look, they've got resources, they've got cash, they've got everything I need to start my label. And she did what she did in Hybe because her intention was to use someone else's money, someone else's investment, and just reap the benefits, reap the company and the successful artist at the end. I've already said as well that I think NewJeans' name is now far too tarnished. Even if they did rebrand, we know they're NewJeans, right? Yes, they have a core fan base still to this day. If you find some hate comments down below, that's them. They exist, they're still there. But that's not enough for them to have anything near the career they had before, right? A lot of the general public will still listen to their music, but we also know that streaming doesn't really make money. So that's not a worthy investment. And from Min Hee-jin's point of view, I imagine that it would be much easier for her to start from scratch, again, with somebody else's money. And I feel like that somebody else could be Banner, because she's, even throughout all of this, Min Hee-jin has still somehow managed to maintain connections with somebody. We know that Banner are likely the ones who wrote Pit Stop for NewJeans to perform at ComplexCon, which means Min Hee-jin actively still has her co-conspirators. And she probably will use this case as her branding and be like, oh, look, this new group, I'm going to do everything for them that I couldn't do for NewJeans now in my own company, even though it's technically Banner. But who knows, maybe she'll usurp them as well. But anyway, bring it back to this case. What I will say is that I think NewJeans actually, to some degree, are expecting and planning to lose this case in October. As I said, they will do their appeals, but I also think the reason they're trying to push back the ruling as much as possible is because they're hoping that if something happens with either Bang Shiok's cases or Min Hee-jin's cases, that will help them. For example, if Bang Seok is found to have done some sort of stock, fraud or like manipulation, then that would help Min Hee-jin's case to get her stock options. And if she then gets the money from that, I'm sure she's told them that, oh, if I win my cases, I'm going to use this money to start a new company and I'll take care of you guys. We can pay the fees. But if you actually do the math, the money that Min Hee-jin would get is nowhere near how much NewJeans need to pay, even on the lowest end, to escape ADOR. And as I said, I don't think she's going to invest that money in them, but NewJeans are working under that assumption. The alternative plan I think they might have is that they're dragging out this case for as long as possible, so that by the time they have no choice but to go back to ADOR, especially if ADOR is still at that point on the we're not going to charge you anything. Like, for example, we're in 2025 and their contract ends in 2029. So if we say that this case drags out for at least another year, that's 2026 now, end of 2026, they only have 3 years left on their contract, right? So by that logic, if they can get it even longer than that, they would have less time than that. If ADOR sticks to their, we're not going to charge you anything, we're not going to like treat you guys badly when you come back, blah, 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 it actually is beneficial to NewJeans because they get away with all the damage they've done thus far. They don't get sued for anything, they don't have to pay any like contract violations, and then they still get to enjoy all the good things that ADOR can offer them, just they have to endure it for a short amount of time. So that could also be their plan. I don't think that's very likely to happen though, I will say, but I just think that's an alternative as to what NewJeans might be thinking. I think they're most definitely going to lose this case, they're going to lose the appeals, and then they're going to go to court to figure out what the termination will be. That is my opinion in a nutshell, basically. Ultimately, all in all, NewJeans are in a lose-lose situation, as far as I'm concerned. At this point, there is actually no good option for them. Going back to ADOR, not only is not a reality they are willing to face, but it's something I think cannot work because they've already done enough damage to their brand value that there is not really a future for them, even if they do go back. Likewise, the longer this case goes on, it only does more damage to them as well. And even if they are somehow able to terminate the contract, I cannot see a world in which they do that without having to pay an exorbitant penalty, which will stay with them probably for the next 20 to 30 years of their life if they don't continue as artists. And the saddest part of all of this is that, as I've said from the beginning, after all of this has been said and done, and Min Hee-jin has left them at the scene of the crime, when the police show up, it will be the NewJeans members left holding the bag. But fear not, Min Hee-jin may think she's gotten away with the perfect crime, but in a future video, we will definitely be talking about all her legal troubles, so make sure you stay tuned. Anyway, that's all for today. This has been Han from the Haniverse. Thanks for stopping by.